Well, Byron, thanks for joining us, and let's talk a little Auburn football. And interesting times for the Tigers right now. Last weekend, I don't know if I've ever seen a finish like that one. That was a wild one, wasn't it?
Well, I tell you what, I mean, it may not have been as exciting as the kick 1 second finish, but it was close. Just to have a win of any kind is good, especially SEC win. But that was a pretty exciting finish. My heart's not. I think I had to take a couple of pills after that game was over.
Give me your take on Auburn right now. Of course, there's a lot of talk in the media about what's going to happen in the future. What's your take on the coaching staff, and is there any possibility they pull this thing out, or are we looking at a new system next year?
Well, I mean, I'm looking at it in the papers and listening to it on the media like everybody else. But I tell you what I'd like to see is Coach Harsin, get a chance to really rewrite the ship and get things aligned. I think a lot of people don't realize it's kind of deceptive because sometimes coaches leave and go to a place and get in and plug in and things just start clicking right away, and that's really not the norm. With Gus, Coach Malzahn, it was a little deceptive in the fact that most of the kids that were on the team were his guys. He actually recruited those guys. He left and went to was it Louisiana State?
Arkansas State.
Arkansas State, but he had recruited most of the kids that were on the team. So when he came back to the guys that he recruited specifically for his system. And so there was not much of a learning curve for them. They just had to scrap what was tried to be, implemented and just go right back to doing. So, it takes a minute to really kind of get your system, your guys, your structure, your culture, all of those things. It doesn't just happen overnight, but I hope that they can line it up and get things together, but it's going to be a tough road.
Yeah, interesting. We hear a lot of the media people talking about who's going to be the next coach. When I listened to you, when I listened to Coach Tuberville last week, you're kind of saying the same thing. Like maybe we need to, let this go a little bit and get his guys in there and then see what happens.
Yeah, it's a lot to transition. It really is. And you look at Coach Saban. Coach Saban didn't walk in and start winning.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it took him a year or two to really get the fundamental infrastructure for what you're seeing now, and you really build it from inside out. It's and you got this whole transfer portal culture going on, and you really don't know what you have until you put them on the field. And a lot of times you go, if you try to build a team just on transfers, man, that's a grab bag.
Yeah.
Not everybody doesn't turn out to be a Joe Burrow. You know what I'm saying? It takes a minute. It's going to be tough and challenging because at the end of the day, the SEC is built from inside out. Those teams are built from inside out. If you know anything about football, it's going to be what you have up front that determines the level of your success. So that's where you really look to see whether or not you're going to be able to compete. Because you can trick people for a few minutes, but after a while, after a few minutes, after all the tricks are gone, then you got to knuckle down and go head to head. And that's where most teams are in the SEC.
Yeah. And I think that's the frustrating thing for maybe Auburn people this year is we've got, 3 or 4 of the same guys that we had last year. And they're thinking, right, why didn't we use that portal or go after some JUCO guys or something to fill in those gaps this year?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you can try that, but again, you don't really know what you have until you have the opportunity to line them up and see where they are. We don't know he may have tried some guys and maybe they didn't work out, or
right.
I don't know all the guys that he had a chance to bring in. And I know we'd like to think that we see everything and know everything and hear everything and have the inside scoop on everything. But I've been around long enough to know we don't know it all. And not all is being publicized. So I think at the end of the day, what my coach in Buffalo, Chuck Knox, he said you have to play the hand you dealt. And what he's doing, and he's doing the best job he can do with what he has, and still needing, you know, a little time to bring those type of guys and even staff. I mean, you know, it's his staff is still it's new.
Right.
And so even though he may have known some of those guys, they're in a completely different environment, a completely different league, and it calls for a completely different approach in how you coach.
Right. And that's one of the things I hear almost every day is, well, Coach Harsin has his guys in place now. But what they don't say, and what I remember, is it was a rough winter last winter. And
Absolutely.
he couldn't really get his guys to come to Auburn after all that. So,
Yeah.
not that Coach Keesaw is not a good offensive coach, but, maybe Harsin doesn't have exactly the guys that he wants there now.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is true. And you know, you really have to try and find a way to create the right culture. You
Mhm.
know, it's not just X's and O's. It's not. It's a culture where everybody has bought into the system. Everybody has been motivated and encouraged to work in a way that you wanted it to be a finely tuned clock. You know, it's got to be finely wound, and there's a lot of pieces to to football, and to be able to bring all those pieces together and have one cohesive unit, it takes a person that has to be a little bit of a dictator, a little bit of a schmoozer, a little bit of a pep talk, a rah-rah cheerleader, a little bit. The head coach in not today's football has to be a combination of about 12 things. It used to be that they just needed to be a mad dog and just ran everybody, ran the ones off you don't want and keep the ones that survive. I think that was Coach Dye's approach. And
Yeah.
I'm so glad I didn't have to go through that, because I heard people say, man, about half the football team quit, because he'd take them in that winter. I heard that one winter was deadly to some folks. I mean, they just left.
Hmm.
And I said, man, I'm glad I didn't have to go through that, But the ones that stayed, they were stripped down and prepared to do war. And that's what he built the foundation of that football team with.
Yeah. Which reminds me a little bit of last winter
Yep.
with Coach Harsin.
Yep.
But,
Yep.
anyway, let's talk a little bit about LSU coming up this weekend. Auburn is about touchdown underdog.
Yeah.
You've seen a couple of games, I'm sure, on the tube at least. What do you think we have to do to pull this one out this weekend?
Well, obviously we have to get our offense clicking. We got to get Tank loose. He's got to be able to run the football some just to take some pressure off our quarterback. Whether it's regardless of whoever plays. I don't know if TJ is going to play any at all or not, but
Right.
but the main thing is our running game has to be able to function enough to keep pressure off our quarterback. If that defense, all they have to do is pin their ears back and go get them, then we won't stand much of a chance. So the key to the game for us is going to be able to run the football.
Hmm. And we were talking a minute ago about old memories about the LSU game. You played in a couple when you were at Auburn in the late 70s and early 80s, a big rivalry, as it always has been. Tell us a little bit about what you remember about the Bayou Bengal Tigers.
Well, I remember my worst memory is going into the stadium at LSU, and boy, I tell you what, to play there at night, I can't remember a game, professional or collegiate, with so much intensity, so much, rage. I think you could say that they were raging Cajun. They were crazy, and they'd been drinking all day long and eating crawfish all afternoon and coming in there and glitter and lights and flashing and everything. But well, we had went in there and we hadn't won there in a while, and it was a low scoring game. And I think they kicked off to us. We fumbled the first kickoff. They got it and scored, and then our defense kind of held a little while, and then I think they may have scored a field goal, at which we came back and scored once, and so we had the ball driving in to win the game, and got down almost to the 20-yard line, and Joe Sullivan, Pat's younger brother, was quarterbacking at the time, and they called my number and threw a pass and hit me square in the hands in the end zone, and I dropped it. And I tell you what, man, it was, you could just hear the crowd go crazy, and they almost ran out on the field then because the time was almost out. And I do remember, I think it was Van Hoos, Alf Van Hoos.
Mhm.
We get in the locker room, and my locker is surrounded by media, just waiting to feed. I think you could call it the Shark Tank. This is the first time I really understood what Shark Tank meant. And it was surrounded, man. And I get over in there, and I walk in, and I made up in my mind, and I know it had to be the Holy Spirit that gave me this before I even walked into the locker room. There's never been a football player that's ever played the game that's never dropped a pass. And that was my mindset. And I'm not that smart. So I know it was the Spirit of God that gave that to me. So I go in and I sit down, and boy, they begin with all of the questions. You know, what happened was, and they gave me every excuse that you could have that I could bite on. It was like, well, what did the light hit you in the eyes? Was it a bad pass, or were your hands wet? They gave me every opportunity to take some excuse, and I looked them square in the eyes, and I said, I dropped it. And it's almost like you could hear the air come out of them, and they all just turned and walked away. It's like I didn't give them a story, you know. I just said, hey, I dropped it, you know. And so Van Hoos, years later, I was working with the women's basketball program at Auburn with Joe Champy. We were in Tacoma, Washington, and about to play in the Final Four with the women's team, about to play Tennessee or somebody in the Final Four, and I just happened to go through the lobby of the hotel where we were staying, and Van Hoos was sitting in the lobby, and I said, hey, how you doing? I said, you remember me? He said, yeah, Byron, I remember you well. He said, listen, he said, I've always wanted to tell you this. He said, we were down in Baton Rouge. I said, I know where you're going. he said, he said, we waited for you and gave you every opportunity to make some kind of excuse for why you didn't catch that pass. And he said, I've always wanted to tell you that I really appreciated you for how you handle that. He said, I don't know if I could have handled that the way you did. I said, well, it really wasn't me. I think it was the Spirit of God that helped me come to the realization that nobody's perfect, and we aren't pros. We're still college players. And as much as we like to perform and go out and operate at a professional level, we're not. And so I said, I just took it in stride and just told the truth. And sure enough, I don't know, it may have been 20 years later, he said, man, I just wanted to let you know that moment. I remember that moment to this day.
Mm-hmm. Well, probably one of the few that Byron Franklin dropped during his career.
Well, it didn't throw me many, so I could count on my hand the number I dropped, because I can count on both hands the number they threw.
They had some running backs in those days, right?
Yeah, man, we had some great running backs. So, you know, I caught a few.
Speaking of the Spirit of God, want to ask you about your church. I know you're heavily involved in that, as we were talking a minute ago. Tell us a little bit about how that continues for you in Birmingham and also in Livingston.
Well, my wife and I, we planted a church in Livingston, Alabama, Living Word Church, and it is a mission ministry for us. We, you know, if you know anything about the demographics of the state of Alabama, West Alabama is probably the poorest section of the state, and Sumter County is probably the poorest county and one of the poorest counties in the country. And for us, we just felt like that we were led and directed to start ministry there. And it's grown from just having a Bible study to actually having a full-scale church and ministry that has really been a blessing to the area. And we believe we've been a blessing to the area. And we're going into our 18th, well, we're going into our 19th year now. So I've been a pastor there for 19 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tremendous. How has that changed you, do you think, in your years in Livingston?
Woo. That's a good question. I mean, ministry is gonna affect you, period. It helps you appreciate where you are. It helps you to appreciate that God would have you as a part of what he's trying to do. And it's a humbling experience to see some of the things that people are dealing with and going through. And you know about it. A lot of it you hear about, but ministry brings you to the front lines. And I think it's helped me be a better father. It's helped me be a better husband, helps me to be a better man, minister, and you know, I think that one of the things that we all can do is when we start feeling sorry for ourselves, go out and do something for someone else, and you'll really realize that you're not as in such a bad place as you think you are, and God really has a plan for all of us if we allow Him to use us.